The NFL Divisional Round is here, and we got four pretty fun games on tap for this weekend and some pretty fun DFS slates to discuss as well. What we'll do for today is go game by game, breaking down our thoughts on the key DFS plays within those games and break down our top priorities across the various slates over on FanDuel.com. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research. Joined here as I am every Thursday by Brandon Gdula. Check him out on Twitter at Gdula13. You can find his work at FanDuel Research, where he is a senior managing editor. Brandon, Divisional Round is here. How you doing today?
Good. Trying to stay warm still. It's been quite cold. I know that was a little bit of a storyline for last week's playoff games. Not quite so much this time around, but I'm still cold, so I'm going to complain about it a little bit.
Yeah, the Andy Reid mustache, I duplicated that the next morning because the weather from Kansas City came here to Chicago. I see you have a Chicago hat on, and it wasn't snot on his mustache. I want to make that very clear. If you think it was snot, you have not lived in the Midwest enough because your snot freezes in your nose before it actually runs when it's that cold. So it was like condensation from his breath that was frozen on his like mustache. And like I when I walk the dog, I get that. So like Andy Reid is in a lot of ways like got a similar build, you know, he's my spirit animal. We both like cheeseburgers. Like I may not be a future first ballot Hall of Fame coach, but I do feel like at least on a couple levels, he and I are kindred spirits.
Yeah, I got no comment here, but
who is your NFL comp? Like, who's your NFL head coach comp? Who is the most? You're a little Mike McDaniel-y because he's very dry.
I mean, I don't think there's another one.
You don't take things too seriously, which is good. I think it's a very positive for you. I think it's a very positive thing for him. You're smart. He's smart. So, okay. So you're Mike McDaniel. I'm Andy Reid. We picked two of the best coaches in football. So we're being very flattering of ourselves here. But hey, you know, what else are you going to do on a Thursday? What we're going to do. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't really give off like coach vibes or like football vibes. So I think McDaniel is the biggest outlier in that sense. I don't really know if there's even like
I think that's
close second. I don't think there's a close second.
I think that's accurate. So there really was no other competition there. And like, you know, I got to go for the build, got to go for the facial hair for me. Got to go with the cheeseburger lover. So that's how I wound up on Andy Reid. We're going to break down this all four games across the divisional round. We'll go game by game, but we'll also put timestamps for when the Saturday only discussion begins and the Sunday discussion only begins. If you're listening on the podcast feed, go there to find timestamps if you want to skip ahead to the Sunday section. If you're listening on Saturday, those games have already locked. So check out the episode description for timestamps for when the Sunday portion begins. Also, we do still have our FanDuel Research free play for this week. 2 more weeks. Actually, I think they'll probably have a Super Bowl one too. So a couple more weeks to get some potentially free cash over at FanDuel Research. Go to FanDuel.com/research and find the post on the homepage that has a link to the free play for this week and every week. So FanDuel.com/research to get yourself entered for this week's free play. Do not forget to check out the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, not just the NFL show for 2 more weeks, but also we have our PGA podcast talking both betting and DFS every Tuesday. I believe we have lock coming up right now for the American Express, but for next week, check us out Tuesday there. Austin Swaim also talking betting and DFS over on the UFC side of things, and of course Tom Vecchio with the Daily ISO for NBA DFS every weekday, all right here in the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. You can also find the PGA, NFL Heat Checks, and the Daily ISO over on FanDuel TV Plus, and of course NFL show live on the FanDuel YouTube page every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Shout out to all of you watching on YouTube as of right now. When it comes to the NFL playoffs, you got to win one game at a time. When you bet the NFL playoffs on FanDuel, one game can mean a lot of wins. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, has all your favorite bets like the money line and spread, and then there's all sorts of prop bets like quarterback passing yards or who will score the first touchdown. Plus, every day there's an NFL game, FanDuel is giving all customers a no-sweat same-game parlay. That means when you combine all your bets for a chance at a bigger payday, you'll get bonus bets back if your SGP doesn't win. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. Minimum 3-leg parlay required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expire 7 days after receipt. Max refund $5 unless otherwise specified. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, Virginia, and Vermont. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut, 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming and Kansas, and in Kansas, go to ksgamblinghealth.com. Louisiana is 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghealth.org, and in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Let's kick things off here by talking about the first game of the weekend. That is the Houston Texans at the Baltimore Ravens right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. The Ravens are favored by 9.5. Total in this game is down to 43.5, in large part because there is some weather for this game. Currently 14-mile-per-hour winds in the forecast for Baltimore on Sunday. So that's one key thing to note for this game, is that there is some potential wind impacting this one. Injuries for this game: Mark Andrews got into full practice Wednesday, meaning he'll likely be good to return from his ankle injury this week. Based on the initial timeline for Andrews, I think it's pretty fair to expect that he's limited here, but I would bet that he does play. They also signed Dalvin Cook to the active roster. Sounds like he'll be active to make his Ravens debut. What could be more delightful than muddying the Ravens' backfield even a bit more? Texans placed Noah Brown on IR. That's why I said it. And they played the Browns last week. He's on IR, so no Noah Brown. Robert Woods still limited this week with his hip injury. Didn't play a ton last week, even with him being active for that game and with Brown leaving early. John Mechie is the guy who played a lot of snaps, but now Mechie limited the first 2 days with a foot injury. He was not on the injury report last week, so it does seem like this is a new ailment for Mechie. So, Brandon, let's begin things more holistically here. How are you viewing things as the Texans go on the road to face the Ravens in this game?
Well, I like the under for the Texans game last week, and that didn't exactly pan out. But I'm there again this week, and this is a low total already. A lot of reasons for it. One, the Texans, while they're a good offense, have basically overperformed based on my model, which just looks at underlying data and tries to project out your team's points per play based on that underlying data. But when CJ Stroud, for as good as he is, when he's away from his home stadium, you kind of see some issues. Under 7 yards per attempt in outdoor games, QB rating 85 compared to 8.8 yards per attempt, and a 108.3 quarterback rating. Indoors, his passing touchdown rate, so basically the percentage of his passes that are touchdowns, under 2%. Outdoors, almost 6% indoors. Like, you do a good job of adjusting for when teams are moving indoors or moving outdoors. But otherwise, like, if you just look at opponent adjusted numbers, Stroud looks phenomenal. He's had one of the best rookie seasons in that capacity that, frankly, I remember just from a pure passing standpoint. But with that in mind, I am a little bit nervous about the move outdoors. So I'm not necessarily thinking this one is the highest scoring game of the weekend. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I talked about the under on Monday Tuesday when I did the First Look podcast. It was 45.5 at that time. I now have 43.5 as being right on the number. I have 43.7. So got the under when it was at 45.5. I think it's about right now based on my numbers after accounting for the wind and all the stuff you alluded to as well. And I think for that reason of the quarterbacks on the Saturday slate, I have Stroud as QB4. We were on Stroud pretty heavily last week. We said that he was the guy we were most likely to use in a single lineup for that Saturday slate, despite the matchup. I think this is a different set of circumstances because I'm much higher on the game environment for Packers 49ers, and then there's Lamar Jackson. So to me, I prefer both guys in the Niners Packers game over Stroud, and obviously Lamar too. So Stroud, I think, is QB4, and even on the 2-game slate, as much as it breaks my heart, I'm probably not going to get there. Are you kind of in the same range there for the overall quarterback discussion?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Really like Lamar, feel fine with Purdy, but then you get into the the underdog quarterbacks. I am probably going to lean Jordan Love.
I agree.
Not every time, but
I might.
It's basically what I was getting at is like it's not going to be every single time, but it's going to be pretty close. FanDuel Sportsbook has odds on the highest scoring team for the weekend. The Texans have the longest odds at plus 2,900. Green Bay's 17-1 as the next lowest or next longest odds. So expectations are, I think, justifiably down. It's really hard to look at Stroud, look at Nico Collins, and just sort of like bump them down a ton.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are legitimate reasons to do so. And so for that reason, I do have Stroud as QB4. Can't really envision playing all 4 quarterbacks on a 2-game slate. So CJ, maybe we'll see you next week.
I'd love to see him next week. I think that'd be a lot of fun, but I just think that I respect the Ravens defense a lot, how adaptive they are. And I think that's an important conversation too, because when we're talking about this 2-game Saturday slate, I want to stick with the Texans here to kind of honestly polish them off pretty fast. I think they're a pretty easy team for, at least for me. We've got Devin Singletary checking in at a value salary of $6,400. And the reason I'm focusing here on the value guy as opposed to Nico Collins at 87 is because of this guy right here, Christian McCaffrey, $10,800. And that is tough to get to. Even if you don't go Lamar Jackson, it's tough to get to. So we have Singletary 64. Collins 87, and then you get down to Robert Woods at 53 and John Mechie at $5,000. Mechie, as mentioned, is banged up. Xavier Hutchinson would be the next guy up for them if Mechie were to be banged up, and then Dalton Schultz's salary is $5,800. So I want to ask you, Brandon, we're low on the Texans in this game from an offensive perspective. How willing are you to use the value plays here in Singletary, potentially the pass catchers, in order to get up to studs like McCaffrey on this 2-game slate?
Yeah, that question basically comes down to how high are you on Christian McCaffrey and what are the odds that, as you would phrase it, he burns us. And look, we're not getting anyone else. Frankly, there is nobody else. Maybe you could argue Kyron Williams this year had a similar role to Christian McCaffrey. He still has just an untouchable role. So it's a matter of, can you see enough to justify in these guys to get to McCaffrey because you really, really want to play him?
Mm-hmm.
I think you could probably justify that. I will say, like, Devin Singletary is going to be in almost every optimizer that you look at this week. And I think it's justifiable based on what his role ultimately is. 75% snap rate last week, 70 scrimmage yards, 13 carries, 3 targets. Presumably, I mean, he ran almost 55% of the routes for this team. If they're trailing, like, there's at least a path to production through the air at that salary. I think it's reasonable. As for the other, like the pass catchers, a little bit harder to justify because Nico Collins just soaks up so much of the targets. 32% last week, and then it's kind of just shuffled around from there. You could make a case for certain players, but in terms of routes, if you look at the receivers and tight ends from last week, and it's not like Noah Brown played most of the game or something.
Right.
He ran 4 routes. Mechie had a 68% route rate, Schultz 59%. I know that passing overall was kind of down, but there's a lot of unknown and there is a lot of risk. I do, though, think that if this is the only way to get to McCaffrey, it just comes down to how badly you want to play McCaffrey. And so maybe we circle back to these value plays, but as standalone plays, no, they're not really plays that I'm not eager to roster anyone here because I think there's a relatively capped ceiling in this matchup, and I know we don't say floor, but we don't know who's going to get targets or run routes really.
Right. And I think the better question is, do any of them have a ceiling for the value plays too? And I'm not sure if they do. Now with Mechie, I much prefer him over Woods. He ran a lot more routes than Woods last week. 15 routes for Mechie, 8 for Bobby Trees. Mechie has had a 61% and 68% snap rate the past 2 games. And it's taken him a while to break out. Like even when Woods and Brown were banged up earlier on this year, he wasn't getting a ton of snaps. So I think that's a bit discouraging, but Mechie was a 2nd-round pick coming out of Alabama and then missed all of last year as he was undergoing cancer treatments and then came back this year. And it seemed like kind of a slow ramp up for Mechie, but like there is talent there. So same as you, would I use him as a standalone play? No. Can I justify him as a route to getting to McCaffrey? And in asking the same question, do I care enough about McCaffrey to do that? Yeah, I do. So I think it's very likely I have Mechie and McCaffrey in my primary lineup for Sunday. I think that's where I settle in on this one.
Yeah, I was basically gonna follow it up where, look, there's nobody else on the slate. You could say Lamar, you could say Nico if you're not worried about the matchup. You can say Debo, maybe Ayuk, but McCaffrey is the guy. He's salaried as such.
And the fall off after Ayuk is precipitous.
Yeah. So then the flip side as well, if Ayuk and Debo have a good game because we like Purdy and it doesn't all go to McCaffrey, right, you still need those players.
Right.
You're not going to get all of them, obviously. No. But yeah, it comes down to like, I think the best way I can phrase it is I would not really consider Mechie. I'm barely considering him on the 2-game slate. On the 4-game slate this week,
right?
I don't think that he would be in the player pool.
Yeah, I mean, then you add in guys like Josh Reynolds 61 is not like a true value play, but you got Jameson Williams 53, Khalil Shakir 59, Justin Watson 5,000. I think all those guys grade out better, and like they all have their flaws, but I think they all grade out better than Mechie does for the 4-game slate.
Yeah, I mean Baltimore also, like if you're in the camp of it only takes one or anything, like they're the toughest team in terms of yards per target allowed on downfield passes. So passes traveling at least 10 yards downfield. We got wind moving outdoors where we've seen Stroud's numbers drop a lot. Again, anything can happen in one iteration of a game, but the sort of long-term expectations here are that for me, passing is going to be at a little bit of a premium. And I guess the other side of the ball, which we'll get into here in a second, is Baltimore has a tough rushing matchup, but I don't think that's going to force them into a lot of incompletions and give Houston a lot of plays either. So,
right.
But maybe you have a different read on that.
Nope. Let's talk about the backfield here for Baltimore to begin with. Of course, no Keaton Mitchell here. Melvin Gordon released. So Dalvin Cook signed to the active roster. We know that Dalvin is cooked, but I also kind of think that Gus Edwards and Justice Hill suck. I don't think they're like great talents. So I think that Cook will have a role in this game, especially because like if we had heard an hour and a half before lock that, hey, Dalvin Cook's active, that's kind of cool. Or he'd been elevated from the practice squad and stuff like that, it'd be one thing, but they both signed him to the active roster and we got a Shefty tweet saying that Cook will be active. That to me says he's going to have a non-zero snap rate in this game. Doesn't mean he'll be a lead back where I can use him at 45. No, I'm not going to consider Dalvin Cook. Does it lower my thoughts on Gus Edwards and Justice Hill? Yes. So I know it's a good spot. I know we saw Jonathan Taylor run really well against the Texans defense, despite the fact, like you said, they are a good overall rush defense. I just don't know if I really want to do it. So I'm going to have Gus Edwards, but it's going to be like obligatory and I'm not going to like it. And I'm not going to actively seek him out. How are you viewing the backfield here for Baltimore?
I mean, yeah, that's how I feel about these guys on a full slate.
Yeah.
If you look at the 2-game sample without Mitchell, but excluding week 18, the snap rate's been basically split 50-50. We know Hill gets more of the targets, but Edwards has a 26% overall red zone share. So that's the, carries and targets versus the whole team's carries and targets. It's 9.7% for Hill. Usually I'm fine siding largely with targets. but not in this case because of the matchup and because of what this offense is and the fact that they're favored. Would I be surprised that Gus Edwards scores twice? Not at all.
No.
It's just a hard salary at 6,900 to sort of make him a plug and play type of option. So where does Edwards sit for you among all the running backs? I guess I got 3 questions here if I can remember them all. Where does Edwards sit for you on the 2-game slate? Any Justice Hill, and a conversation we need to have for both of the 2-game slates. Are you trying to force in a running back flex?
I don't think I'll be forcing in an RB flex, but I think I'll get here based on initial builds. You can go McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, Devin Singletary if you use Brock Purdy at quarterback, which I think is probably going to be where I'm going to go. But that to me says that Gus is my RB4 on this slate. I don't think I'll get to Hill. I used a larger sample. It's the games with Gus and Hill both fully active, but with Mitchell not having a role. So before he got hurt too, there were 5 games there. 57.9 yards per game for Hill, which is actually not terrible. 6.7 carries, 3.3 targets, 13.8% red zone share, but like that's not a lot of touchdown equity. I think like he could have 60 yards and get you 6.5 or 7 FanDuel points. So probably not going to get to Hill. I think it really is about those 3.5 if you want to make Gus a half running back here. I'm very receptive to not having running back in the flex. Like if I want to dump off a Singletary, dump off of Aaron Jones, or if it's a non-McCaffrey lineup, I'm probably going to have only 2 running backs to jam in, guys like Nico, Debo, Ayuk, et cetera. But I'm a lower on the Ravens backfield for sure. Let's talk about the pass catchers for the Ravens. Mark Andrews, I think back this week, but I also think likely to be not 100% based on what the Twitter doctors say. They've never been wrong before. So we'll put full stock in that. Got Zay Flowers, 7,000. Zay to me is very interesting because in the games with Andrews and with Odell Beckham playing, Zay's target share goes down to 21.4%. It is 24.7% with Lamar and without Mark Andrews. So his target share goes down, but he gets a lot more deep work. Like they allow him to kind of be a more vertical wide receiver. But it didn't really translate. If you remember earlier on this year, Zay would constantly be like $6,000. We'd use him and then we'd regret it. So I think 7,000 is a bit high for the full slate for Zay. I don't view him as a priority. I don't honestly view any Raven other than Lamar as a priority, despite the matchup. I'm willing to use some of the lower salary guys like Beckham, but like, I think they're just really spread out and we're not getting a ton of salary compensation to account for that. So to me, Lamar is the only real priority. I'm fine using Lamar naked, like with no stacking partner as if at quarterback. How are you viewing the pass catchers here?
Yeah, similar to you where nobody really stands out to me. And we have George Kittle at tight end in the game we're about to talk about next. I don't anticipate a huge role for Mark Andrews as of Thursday morning. That could change, and we could
if you get
Andrews,
a Shefty tweet or a Pelissero tweet saying like, yeah, he's good to go, he'll have his full role, that's different.
Yeah, and like it's not the same. I'm not saying like this is the case, but like Sam Laporta seemed very unlikely to play early on last week, played 80% of the snaps. Like it's possible. It's also possible that Andrews comes in for red zone work, gets about 4 or 5 high leverage targets. I think that's possible. I wouldn't like count out Isaiah Likely, especially if you're building Lamar lineups, just to sort of differentiate a bit. I don't know why Likely just doesn't have a role whenever Andrews is active. He seems really good and he produces whenever Andrews is out. But it's a lot of sort of if then or like what if conversations, which you have to have on a 2-game slate. There's no way around it. But yeah, nobody's really a priority other than Lamar. And so my question to you is, you're building, you already hit on this, but you're building one lineup for the 2-game slate. Is Lamar able to be in it? Well, first of all, would you want him to be in it in a perfect scenario? And then secondly, do you think it's even feasible based on how the rest of the slate shakes out?
Ideal world, I would use Lamar, but we're
Mhm.
not in an ideal world. And I know I want McCaffrey more than I want
Yeah.
Lamar. So I prioritize McCaffrey above Lamar. And I do think you have to choose one or the other for this slate.
Yeah, it's really, really difficult to build unless you're, I mean, that's where someone like Justice Hill comes into
Sure.
play.
Sure.
Like Hill, Singletary, McCaffrey,
I
the
think the other
Ravens
guy here
defense.
is Odell.
Sure, yeah.
We talked a lot about Odell this year, where when he was healthy, he was a very productive wide receiver in terms of earning targets. His yards per route run number was pretty good. The problem was his snaps were always very muted. The question is, and typically I do this thought exercise with running backs, but does Odell's role expand now that we're in the playoffs? My lean is toward no, just because I think Rashad Bateman got kind of healthier as the year went along. He still wasn't good at the end, but like I mean, I love Bateman. It was a rough year. So like I lean towards no, but I do think there is a scenario in which Beckham's role expands now that they're in the postseason. So I'm willing to use Beckham at 56. I think of the skill players for the Ravens, Beckham's probably the guy I'm highest on. How are you reading him? Any interest in Bateman? Stuff like that.
Yeah, with Beckham, like I definitely understand the case. I understand like a realistic path to some sort of upside. He's got a 14.2 yard ADOT, same as Rashad Bateman. He's averaged 2.4 downfield targets in all of his games and 2.21 yards per route run, which is probably just the best metric that you could look at, which just accounts on a, obviously on a per route basis, but also gets targeted on 25% of his routes.
Yeah.
Even if his role doesn't expand, he's very much in play at 5,600. If it does happen to expand, there's a path to, being in the perfect lineup for the full weekend, honestly.
Yeah.
The question, though, is how much are they going to throw? Are they going to throw it deep a ton?
Especially given the weather.
Yeah, given the weather. But again, tough rushing matchup.
Right.
Do you have data on like what Baltimore generally does when they face tougher rush defenses?
No.
Okay. Well, yeah, you tend to have which defenses get run on
Yeah.
more or less than others. So I
So
guess
the Texans defense faces a 53% pass rate, which is about league
yeah.
average. The
Okay.
Ravens face a 56% pass rate on early downs, which is a bit above average. So I think we'll see more passing volume out of the Texans than the Ravens. But that's also been the case for the Ravens all year. Like they've
Yeah.
been good enough where they haven't had to like chuck it 40 times. So
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm okay with Beckham. Like not actively prioritizing, but just kind of knowing the way the slate breaks down. Like it's similar to Mechie, and I prefer him over Mechie.
Yeah.
Like, will I use him if it allows me to get to McCaffrey? Yes, I'm okay with that personally.
Yeah. And just last thing about Lamar, I think he's phenomenal, but and this could change in the playoffs, but I feel like he's always content handing the ball off for touchdowns.
Yeah, he's an unselfish player, and I hate him for
Yeah.
it. Like he should be more
Yeah.
selfish. Like, come on, man.
So that makes me feel a little bit better about going with Brock Purdy and Christian McCaffrey.
All right, so let's talk about those guys and talk about the second game on Saturday. That is the Packers at the 49ers right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. Niners are 9.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 50.5 right now. Weather issues. There could be some drizzle during this game, and wind speeds are 6 miles per hour. They were 4 miles per hour yesterday, 8 miles per hour Monday. So I think they'll settle in probably somewhere around 6 with potentially some rain in the forecast of this one, but not enough to be a concern, at least for me. Injuries to note here, A.J. Dillon did not practice either Tuesday or Wednesday due to his neck injury. I think he's trending towards sitting once again. And then Jaden Reed and Christian Watson limited again. They both played through their issues last week to an extent. They'll play, but they're not 100% right now. The 49ers key pieces are all healthy. Trent Williams, good to go. Christian McCaffrey, good to go, et cetera, et cetera. They are full go for this game. So, Brandon, overall thoughts for you with the Packers taking on the 49ers out in Santa Clara?
Yeah, so I kind of view this game the same way as the total and the spread. Uh, that puts it in a much higher tier than Houston and Baltimore for me. Just prefer a lot of plays, a lot of routes to this game. We're talking it's so weird with Stroud and Lamar, but this is closer to a 2 QB game, even though my favorite QB is in the other game. The other one's CJ
Yeah.
Stroud. Like,
Yeah.
I'm more likely to build stacks of Purdy and Love. It's a little, it's
100%.
a lot easier to do that for each of these guys. But I don't know. Like, the 49ers are such a dominant team when they're clicking that this could be a route, but I think Green Bay is pretty good. I think Jordan Love's a lot better than I think he even still gets credit for. So, how do you see this one playing out? Because I could see it going sort of one of two ways. I don't think the 49ers are going to get blown out like the Cowboys did, though.
And I think that the one of two ways is either the Niners win running away or it's a total shootout. Like those are the only two routes that I see for this game. I do not see a low scoring game here. I've bet a lot of unders on big games this year. I took the over on this one when it was at 50. I've got a 52.1 right now with the wind speeds at 6 miles per hour. So that's a big part of it. And like, that's even with like, I think that the Niners, I think we see a lot of points here, and I think that the Niners are justifiably big favorites, but that does not lower me on Love and the Packers because I think they're efficient enough passing to still put up FanDuel points even when they're down big. Like we saw it with the Cowboys last week. Like they were down huge, but they still came through for DFS because they're efficient enough passing when they're in a super negative script, they can still move the football. So that to me is why this game is the premier game of the 2-game slate, and you could make a strong case for it being the premier game of the 4-game slate as well, is what I would say here. And that's a big part of why I view McCaffrey as being a legitimate priority across this slate. I want to make sure I can get there because I think he's going to have a great role in the playoffs. I think this game will feature a lot of points. And I think the Packers defense, despite some impressive showings recently, is one of the poorer ones that is still live in the playoffs. So I like McCaffrey. And I think that for like one lineup on Saturday, I am very likely to pair him with Brock Purdy as a quarterback. You mentioned it's a 2-quarterback game. I agree. I think that applies to Jordan Love too. So, how are you viewing Brock Purdy as far as the overall quarterback landscape for the 2-game slate?
He's my QB2 behind Lamar, but also the most likely quarterback that I'll play. He's got numerous stacking candidates, including Christian McCaffrey, who is, a pretty good receiver. So it gives you a lot of different variations in the the lineups where you're not playing McCaffrey or you're building a core and you move away from McCaffrey out of sort of obligation because there's going to be a pretty narrow path to the players you're on to get McCaffrey in your lineup. Swapping to a Purdy stack protects you in the sense of like, hey, McCaffrey has 130 yards, but no touchdowns, and Purdy throws for 3. And but you have like naturally, if people are trying to play McCaffrey, they're not going to be able to play Debo or Ayuk as much or as easily. So Purdy, he's been, early on in the season, he was the kind of guy who commanded an offense with multiple pass catchers. And I put him sort of in like the Matthew Stafford bucket of he's got a lot of guys in play, but I don't really want to play him. He has some upside though.
Oh yeah.
Like that's the biggest change probably for I'll say it's one of the biggest changes for any particular player I've had all year where I did not expect Purdy to have burnable ceilings.
Yeah.
So I'm into Purdy. He has really taken advantage of matchups against pass defenses 20th or worse, 283 yards per game, an absurd 10.7 yards per attempt with an 8.8 yard ADOT. I know he gets the screens to the house conversation going around him a lot, but just been really, really good. Yeah.
He does have some chucking in him too. Like there's a little bit of degaff in him, and like I like that for a quarterback. And the upside discussion for Purdy shifted, I think, on full slates. But when you talk about a 4-game slate or a 2-game slate, even like that's a different discussion, even where you don't need 30-point ceiling to be viable. And I think he does have that. So I think that Purdy to me is, like you said, the quarterback I'm most likely to use if I have a single lineup for this week. Jordan Love, I think, is my QB3. Very okay getting there, just because, again, I think that he's been efficient enough where I can expect them to still put up points even if they're down. The 49ers rank 5th against the pass based on numberFire's schedule adjusted metrics. They do face a ton of passes, though, in large part because of script, but also they are 9.5-point favorites in this game. You can run on them a bit. So, like, if it's a neutral script, I think that's why you can see a lot of Aaron Jones here. And I think that'd be fine. But Jordan Love, I think, will put up points even if they are down. So I don't like using 3 quarterbacks on a 2-game slate, but I think you can justify all 3. So if I am setting like betting markets right now, I'm like probably 75% likely to use 3 quarterbacks across the Saturday slate, which it feels really gross, but I do think it's fine for this week specifically.
Yeah, and Love hasn't faced a ton of top 10 pass defenses, but he's been good in them. 272 yards per game, 2.3 touchdowns per game, 0.37
like
EPA
all 3
per drop.
Minnesota, Chicago, and Dallas were playing good football before he faced them.
But 0.37 EPA per dropback over opponent expectations. So that's absurd. Again, that's a 4-game sample specifically.
Yeah.
The Dallas game fits in there, but not the others there recently. But like he's good. He had that hot start and then hit a lull, and people kind of gave up on him. Myself included a bit because the underlying data wasn't great, but everything else since then has been pretty phenomenal. And he's got multiple pass catchers. Yeah. The problem is
he got too many.
He's got too many, and they're all basically hurt.
They're hurt, but they're all like good when they're healthy.
Yeah.
Like that, like if it were like, oh, they're all hurt, who cares? There's no upside, et cetera, then like you can just like ignore it and move on. Like if it's the Patriots, like who cares? Like I'm not going to worry about it, but like they're all good. Looking back to last week during the wild card round, route leader was Romeo Doubs, and he made me look like a dummy because he was just posterizing dudes. 16 routes run for him, 6 targets. Tucker Kraft ran 15 routes and 3 targets. Dontavian Wicks was next up, 13 routes run, earned only 2 targets, but one of those was deep. Dobbs had 3 deep targets. Obviously, Jaden Reed was he's been doing the same thing all year, where he is only out there for 3 receiver sets and kind of in and out of the lineup. The snap rate's never super high, but he's electric when he gets the ball in his hands. Just didn't get the ball in his hands in this game outside of punt returns. So for me, it feels point chasing and it makes me hate myself, but I do think Dobbs is the preferred guy here as far as the pass catchers go. His like yards per route run numbers were pretty bad before last week, but then 151 yards there, 3 deep targets. So Dobbs' salary 61 probably makes him my preferred guy. I might rank Wicks too, just because I'm so like desperate for salary, and I think he's played well enough to like keep that role. But like, I do worry that with Watson a week further removed from his injury and Reed being very good, maybe Wicks does get squeezed. I think Dobbs now less likely to get squeezed. So I don't know. I think Dobbs is number 1. I have a hard time identifying who is 2 behind him. I think it's Wicks, but I'm not fully convicted in that.
Yeah, Dobbs has to be 1. He's going to have the safest role, especially after what he did last week. That's not going to go away. And if it does, I think there's a lot of questions to be asked. But the expectation based on the spread is that there's going to be extra passing volume. And it is a misnomer that passing volume is how you get fantasy points at quarterback. You need efficiency. But again, as you pointed out, the 49ers have faced a lot of passing. And in this sense, like Jordan Love can still be efficient because he's an efficient quarterback. So I'm not worried about that. I do expect the passing volume, though, to be up and to sort of flow, not through Dobbs, but again, have him with the safest role. His underlying data last week, really good stuff. 42% of the team's air yards, 16.1 yard ADOT, 4 downfield targets, which for me are targets traveling at least 10 yards downfield, 2 in the red zone. And you talk about his yards per route run or target per route numbers. They're basically sort of average. And, I was always higher on Dobbs than you. Probably the fact that I have him in some dynasty league, but
I've got Reed in a bunch of dynasty leagues, so that would actually make sense. Yeah.
Me too. Yeah. I'm like tied to this offense a lot, but yeah. So yeah, Dobbs is number 1. Based on salary, it feels weird to like, I don't even want to say write off Jaden Reed, but based on salary, it feels safest to go with Dontavian Wicks, who's also really good. This has to be the Packers like long-term plan though. Is like we're just going to draft a bunch of guys in like the middle rounds, and then eventually they're all going to hit at the same time, and then we're going to have too many of them.
They've taken that approach with a bunch of positions. They did it at tight end this year with Kraft and Musgrave. They did it at running back in Aaron Jones' year, because I think that was the Jamal Williams year too. They were both in the same draft class, I believe. Like they've done this for a while, and it's like it worked. So like, why not? As far as Reed goes, he's hard to get to with McCaffrey. I know that $500 does not seem like a lot, but it is on this slate. And so McCaffrey plus Reed is tough to get to. In a non-McCaffrey lineup, I do like the idea of getting to Reed because of the fact that he burned a lot of people last week. And we know he's talented. And he will be out there for 3 receiver sets, which they may have more of if they're in a negative game script. So for a non-McCaffrey lineup, I do like him quite a bit. I just think I'll have McCaffrey. And so it's more so Dobbs / Wicks / Watson there. So I would like to get there in my non-McCaffrey lineups. I just know that realistically, it's not super easy to do so. What about the tight ends for you? Musgrave 51, Kraft 48, low salaries. I'm actually surprised Musgrave's salary is higher. He had that broken play touchdown last week, but it was still Kraft who ran more routes. 15 routes for Kraft compared to 6 for Musgrave. Both guys had 3 targets. I still lean Kraft over Musgrave personally, but I also prefer just getting up to Kittle if I can. So I don't know. What's your read on these two guys, or are they just total scratch-offs for you?
Oh. Scratch offs in terms of lottery tickets or scratch offs?
No, write-offs. Sorry. Not in terms of your taxes, but
just write it off. Yeah. That's what we all do. I think we'll have to have a conversation more about Kittle too, because it's really easy to sort of say he's the guy we want to get to, but is he with McCaffrey like really makes things tight?
You can do it, but you're using Mechie and Odell, I think.
Yeah. But you are. And then the follow-up is like, okay, you kind of have that one lineup. I like to sort of be able to pivot and change things around from my core lineup. I don't think I can do that because there's basically like one lineup, maybe swapping from Purdy to Love with the same lineup, but like, that's a bit tougher. So I think we have to at least be open to these tight ends. I think I'm with you though, more where I liked what I saw, or I'm just going to kind of trust what I saw last week with Kraft. Just having, and his routes have been really high.
And it was the same 2 weeks ago too, when it was Musgrave's first game back. It was still Kraft, and like he's played well. So I think he's a really good blocker. I think it's fair to keep him out there still.
Yeah, 78% or 79%, 71% routes with Musgrave back, with Musgrave at 15 and 29%. So like he's working his way back, I'm sure, but the safer bet is Kraft.
Let's talk Aaron Jones. His role is amazing. His salary is $7,400, so still pretty low. It is a tough matchup, but Jones in the games with at least a 50% snap rate. I'm trying to make this like as tepid for him as possible. Just 50% snap rate. We're not going cherry picking like the most recent games, but even in that sample, which is a 7-game sample, 18.6 carries per game, 3.7 targets, 108.4 yards in scrimmage per game, and a 42% red zone share. He has been a featured back when he's had a 50% snap rate or better. Probably no A.J. Dillon this week. So from a role perspective, Aaron Jones goes nuts. From a matchup perspective, kind of tough. And the spread is not ideal. So I would like to get to Jones in my main lineup, and I think I will. Where are you on him at 74, all things considered?
Well, I would assume that if they are trailing, like you can just scroll down a little bit for the targets. He's got a game with 5 targets, 4, 6, 6, 5, 5. Like Aaron Jones getting targets is
optimal,
very, very understandable, and a smart way to play football. So the question though is, I think ultimately, look, the over 100 rushing yards in 4 straight. If he gets you 100 scrimmage yards but not a touchdown at 7,400, are you happy with that?
That's like kind of what you got out of James Cook last week, and no, you wouldn't be happy with that.
Yeah.
But
his red zone role is really good.
Yeah.
And if we're expecting points, like I want to get to Jones. He might honestly be So we know the biggest priority is McCaffrey.
Yes.
Other names that might be in that like conversation in terms of positional priorities would be Kittle, Lamar. I don't really know if there's any receivers who I would put in that on the 2-game slate. Like, is Jones like the second guy you like? Are you more willing to like
number 3
get to
priority?
Jones?
McCaffrey 1, Kittle 2, Jones 3 for me.
Okay. I'm not going to argue that.
Yeah.
So he's a high priority for us then.
He is. Even with the spread being where it is, I do think that Aaron Jones is the right way to play things for the 2-game slate, and also a consideration for the 4-game slate is not as big of a priority there, given there are some good mid-range running backs on Sunday. Let's talk about the 49ers side of things. We, of course, do have Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle. We talked about McCaffrey already, and we know we want to get there. But realistically, we're not going to get there every lineup. So in a non-McCaffrey lineup, who is your biggest priority between the other 3 in the big 4?
I mean, it has to be Kittle based on the conversation we just had. The positional scarcity.
Well, this is a non-McCaffrey lineup. Just keep that in mind. But that's part of why Deebo and Ayuk are lesser priorities for me, is because I'm assuming I have McCaffrey in there.
Yeah, and you really, I mean, you can make it work, but you're gonna dislike a lot of the plays you probably have.
Yep.
I would. This is a weird one because I want to say Ayuk because he's got, in games with everyone active, he's got 90 scrimmage yards a game, 23% target share, gets downfield work, but the red zone role is not necessarily ideal. And I always tend to prefer downfield work because it's more stable. But whenever you're comparing him to Deebo Samuel in a playoff setting, you're just like, they're going to have plays for him. He's going to do some stuff. He's going to get carries. He's going to have a good red zone role. In that sample, 18% of the team's red zone plays went to Deebo. He's going to get a red zone carry, I'm sure. He's going to get probably another carry as well, if not more. So like if I wasn't comparing Brandon Ayuk to Deebo Samuel, I'd probably say Ayuk, but I think I have to go Samuel due to the sheer torch the slate upside that he possesses.
Melt your face off upside.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has that. And that's why I'm there too. If you look at the games with all of them healthy, which I think might have been the sample you were looking at. Oh no, I look at a different sample because I omit the games where Deebo is like clearly like not healthy earlier on this year. But in that sample, 86.7 yards per game for Deebo and 83.9 for Ayuk. So very similar there with a slight edge towards Deebo, but this is similar to the number you had, 18.4% red zone share for Deebo, and it's half for Ayuk. So yardage, slight favor, slightly leaning towards Deebo, but then the touchdown equity, it's like almost double for Deebo. So that's why, to me, in a non-McCaffrey lineup, Deebo's the bigger priority. And I think if I'm not going McCaffrey, I need to have one of Deebo or Ayuk in that lineup. I think that's where I settle in on it.
You can, I mean, look, 2-game slates are a whole,
One-eyed Jack. Got to get the obligatory hashtag just play Deebo in there. And I agree in non-McCaffrey lineups for that being the caveat. Please read the fine print.
Yeah, just because it's almost impossible to play both together.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2-game slates are, you're going to have some unoptimal plays. I at least want to briefly ask you about defense just to see like who's a cross off for you for defense. But you can play a Purdy, Deebo, Ayuk, and Kittle stack. Like you get all 3 of them.
Yeah.
The chances all 3 of them have huge games. It's not 0, but like you wouldn't normally do that on a full slate, but you can kind of do it. So that's interesting as a pivot away from McCaffrey.
Sure. I think it could be. I'm okay using any defense, honestly, except for the Packers at 32.
Okay.
I'll use the other 3. That's fine. Just because the wind is high enough to justify the Texans, I think. And Derek Stingley's pretty good. Will Anderson's pretty good. So I'm willing to go there. You can make a McCaffrey Deebo lineup work, but I think you need to go with Kraft at tight end if you're going to do that. I think that's the key thing here. So we both listed Kittle as being a priority. Why? What puts you there for you? And then I'll give my reasoning as well.
He's just, frankly, phenomenal to me. I think he's like, I don't think he gets as much opportunity as he would naturally on a different team, but in the playoffs, and in a game where I'm way higher on this game than I am compared to the other game. And I think that if Mark Andrews plays, he's not going to do enough necessarily to separate, but he's also going to ding Isaiah Likely. I'm fine with like Kraft, but just from a positional scarcity standpoint and a salary standpoint,
Right.
Kittle he has run after the catch potential, as we all know. He just has that, man, I should have just found like $800 and played Kittle and sacrificed a little bit at receiver or something like that.
That's the big reason for me is the salary. $6,400 for Kittle. I think that you could make an argument that he is $700 under salaried. Like if I were playing name that salary on Kittle, I probably would have gone 71, I think. And I think that might be the biggest discrepancy on the slate. Like McCaffrey is worth his salary, but I don't think he's under salaried, whereas I do think Kittle is. So in terms of like sheer value on this slate, I think that Kittle might be the number one guy in that regard.
Packers are also 28th in yards per route run allowed to tight ends and 28th in ADOT allowed. He could have a 4-target game, sure, 30 yards, and they could still score.
He could 45. Have a 4-target game for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns too, though.
And he could. And this is different. This is different than just a FOMO. Like, well, I guess I should play him out of fear. It's boy, that salary is really nice. The matchup's there. The game environment's nice. I have a hard time. I would be more okay. No, I can't say that because it'll sound misleading. I was going to say, I was almost going to say,
do it.
I was almost going to say, I'd be more okay, like saying, you know what, I couldn't get to McCaffrey, but I built a really good lineup with higher upside plays elsewhere. Then I would, like, I'm going to feel like a real idiot if I don't get to Kittle enough and he has the game that I think he can.
Yeah.
Because of the other options and the salary. So that's not, I didn't want to say it because Kittle was less of a priority than McCaffrey, but it's probably closer than I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Any other thoughts for you on the Saturday slate?
I think we covered it.
Alrighty, let's move now to the Sunday slate over on FanDuel.com and begin things by talking about it's the let's see here. What's the cast-off bowl? That's the word we're going with. The cast-off bowl. Baker Mayfield against Jared Goff. My two sons dueling on the football field up in Detroit. Right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, the Lions are 6.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 48.5. There is no weather in Detroit, in case you were curious about that. Injuries for this game. Sam Laporta got into full practice on Wednesday. Should be closer to full strength this week, which is good to hear. Chris Godwin and Chase Edmonds both missed practice Wednesday. Godwin is a knee injury. It's a toe for Edmonds. Godwin got a rest day on Thursday. I guess it would have been Friday because they played Monday. So whatever. The second practice of the week last week for a knee injury. I'd assume he's okay, but Edmonds was not on the injury report last week. And that could be significant for Rachaad White if Edmonds cannot go. So I would keep close tabs on the Chase Edmonds injury news for this one. What are your overall views of this game, Brandon? Lions taking on the Buccaneers, the lone dome game on the slate.
Yeah, you got to have some extra attention to the dome game, even though the other game on this slate is Chiefs and Bills.
A lot sexier, yeah.
But I think there are at least questions to be had about Tampa Bay in terms of their offense. They've gotten basically, I'll just sum it up as lucky in a lot of ways, according to like the data that I like to look at.
They've tempted fate a lot.
Yeah.
They've been very dependent on Baker Mayfield, like making S-word stuff happen. S-H-I-T, I don't know, whatever. He's making stuff happen on late downs, which I'm not sure is optimal from an approach perspective. I don't want to put the explicit tag on the podcast on Apple, so.
Yeah, so like I kind of like Detroit here, relatively heavy, but that's not to say that I'm out on the Buccaneers, especially. Maybe we should just start with Rachaad White, because he's someone that if anyone's listened to our podcast, they've basically heard Rachaad White in our love section week in, week out, but his role has been getting a little bit more diminished. If you just look at his average snap rate from the bye to week 15, it was 81%, but since week 16, 72%, getting a little bit phased out, especially with the passing game work, but that could, as you mentioned, come back this week. And at the salary, like, boy, he could be he could be a slate. He could open up everything. He could be a sort of a core play for the 4-game slate. But where are you with? I'm assuming White without Edmonds is a more or less plug and play. You might not be as high as I am on that, but where are you with him if we get Edmonds? Because the efficiency isn't what necessarily drew us to White. It was the volume and the opportunity.
Right. So if we get Edmonds there, I think there is a very obvious path to failure. And I'd be looking at unders on Rachaad White, like rushing plus receiving, because it does seem like they like Chase Edmonds. I like Rachaad White more, but that doesn't matter. Like, who cares what I like? And it's also a tough rushing matchup against Detroit. So he's going to be dependent on getting work through the air, which he does really well. Like, he used to be a receiver. Like, and you can tell when you watch him play, like, this guy's very good with the ball in his hands. But like, I don't want to be fully dependent on that to get yardage. So if there's no Chase Edmonds, I prefer James Cook. Or sorry, if there is Chase Edmonds, I prefer James Cook. At 68 for the 2-game slate. I prefer Isaiah Pacheco regardless on the 2-game slate. I know, shocker. If there is no Chase Edmonds, I think that he and James Cook are more on level footing. I still would probably lean James White, but it's not full James White then.
James White.
Sorry, James Cook. White. Oh my god.
Shout out James
White,
the two
though. Names, yeah.
Shout out James White.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't keep up with him, but
yeah, hopefully it's not problematic.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask because that should be like a screaming value to us, but there's reasons why the salary's down, and there are reasons why we're not just plugging in White and going from there.
So what about the Detroit guys? Because I was listening about priorities on the slate, and they didn't quite make that list. I prefer Pacheco, again, shocker, over Gibbs. I think this matchup sets it better for Gibbs, given how good Tampa Bay is against the run. Last week, we saw a lot of Montgomery, which made sense because they were ahead for a good amount of that game. Not like way ahead, but like they were in a positive script, and you can get the Rams on the ground. Buccaneers, that's a bit tougher to do based on numberFire's schedule adjusted metrics. The Bucs 3rd against the rush, 20th against the pass. So I think Gibbs makes a lot of sense at 73. I would rank him below James Cook and Rachaad White. But where are you on Gibbs and Montgomery in this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, when you have 2 running backs in DFS on a full slate, you don't really have any that we want to target very often unless the salary is right. On a 2-game slate, even a 4-game slate, it's a little bit different. Last week, Montgomery with a 55% snap rate was just more utilized, but that was also the case in the first half, 55% of the first half snaps. You make a good point where this does set up script-wise as more of a Jahmyr Gibbs type of game. But even with the snap rate differential, again, 55% and 33% for the full game last week, because Gibbs gets targets and because of the way that we value targets, their workload was actually about equal.
It was exactly. They had 68 yards in scrimmage and 16 adjusted opportunities each for both guys.
And adjusted opportunities for us, carries plus double your targets, because on average, a target leads to twice as many FanDuel points as a carry for running backs. So that's just the way that we do things. But 15% target share. The red zone role clearly belonged more to Montgomery, but it's hard to ignore passing game work. And I don't necessarily anticipate, even though they're favorites, that he doesn't get that work, because last week he got 4 targets. If this game does stay close, so there's more of a risk with Gibbs. It's not that Montgomery is inherently safe, but Gibbs also has a path to upside. So if I had to pick one, I would still probably just lean Montgomery due to the fact that they are favored pretty heavily. I expect this game to score enough points. His red zone role is good, but Gibbs is someone that it's a really easy justification to differentiate. And I would probably consider building lineups for the Sunday slate with enough salary to get to Gibbs and then just duplicating that and playing one or the other.
I think they're very similar. The reason I prefer Gibbs over Montgomery is the matchup, but also in the 10-game sample with Montgomery being back, 76.5 yards per game for Gibbs, 74.9 for Montgomery. So slight edge for Gibbs, 34% red zone share for Gibbs, 28% for Montgomery. So it's a slight edge for Gibbs in both categories. it's not a huge one, but then you factor in the matchup that pushes me more towards Gibbs there. I want to talk about the quarterbacks in this game because we mentioned that game environment here is better than the Kansas City Buffalo game. I still think I like both quarterbacks in that game more than Goff and Bayfield. Goff and Mayfield, though. Is that egregious? Like, is that stupid on my part to prefer the two cyborgs over the two efficient passers who are indoors?
I don't think it's egregious. I think they're all in play to some degree, though.
Yeah.
Boy, we're going to talk priorities eventually. Josh Allen, definitely someone that you want to prioritize when you can, but we'll get there in a second. I think that this one is a little less priority driven and a little more, which game are you stacking more heavily? Okay. Which game in that particular lineup do you think is the one to stack and kind of build off of that? So I'm lowest on Mayfield naturally.
Yeah.
But, I would consider all four of them, even though I don't want to play all four. I think Mayfield is the QB4 though. So
almost said Maker, so it makes you feel better saying Bayfield.
I know you got me all
Maker Bayfield.
Up. Yeah. But yeah, let's say you're building like 10 lineups and you're picking a quarterback from this game. What's your split of Goff versus Baker?
6-4.
So that close then.
Yeah. I think the question I'd ask you is Mahomes or Goff? I love that we're asking this question, by the way, because it makes me so happy.
I know. I guess I can just get into some of the Mahomes conversation because, Buffalo 2nd and ADOT allowed in that first matchup. His ADOT was 7 yards. And in 6 games against teams that were top 10 in, passing average depth of target allowed, his ADOT was 5.9 yards. Really efficient, all things considered. 56% passing success rate, 0.23 EPA per dropback over expectation. But the downfield pass gets sort of erased here for Mahomes. I think that's going to happen again based on what we've seen trend-wise against similar matchups. I love Mahomes. I hate what defenses are doing to him. But yeah, man, it is close, and I might go Goff.
Okay.
Like 6 out of 10 times. Okay. I think it's close though. What about you?
I prefer Mahomes because of this number. 41 rushing yards last week, 53 2 games before that. He runs more in the playoffs, and that adds a dynamic that we don't see. Like, we saw it more this year, I guess, for Mahomes, but like for a long time, we've seen Mahomes run more during the playoffs, and I care about that. So if it weren't for that, I would go Goff. But because of that, I go 7-3 Mahomes over Goff at 5-10.
Yeah, I'm recanting what I said. I'm going Mahomes.
Okay. Also,
but the fact that it's close is pretty wild.
Let me just gotta look at something really quick over here. What is Patrick Mahomes anytime touchdown odds? Because he has not scored a rushing touchdown yet this year. Plus 600. Let's go. That's my view of this. Is I think he's gonna run for a touchdown. Well, not gonna run for a touchdown. He's gonna run more than usual. And that's beneficial.
Now, I guess we'll talk about Mahomes more. I guess we should stick with this game.
Sure. Okay. Let's talk about the pass catchers here. Amon-Ra St. Brown's salary is $9,200. Rasheed Rice, $78. And then you get to, Rasheed Rice is not in this game. What am I talking about? Okay. So let's talk about the pass catchers in this game. Both these teams are good against the rush, which I think will funnel more work towards the pass. It's another mark in favor of Goff and Mayfield. I think we'll see a good amount of passing volume here. And it should be efficient because they're efficient passers and they're indoors. So what's your read on the pass catchers here, starting with the studs and then talking about the lower salary plays on both sides?
Yeah, I mean, you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, you just can't nitpick it. It's a matter of what's your sort of fear level. Yeah. That's not, I mean, the salary, I know that Jim's circling for anyone who's not watching closely.
Who's a bigger priority for you, Amon-Ra or Josh Allen?
Which Josh Allen?
Which Josh Allen?
I said, well, it's Josh Allen.
Oh, okay. I was like, the Jaguars guys at home.
No, I play IDP.
Yeah,
DFS.
yeah.
Oh, could you imagine? I would.
Oh, green dots,
Gosh.
man. Green dots, snap rate. Let's go.
I can't.
I have full respect for your IDP analysts. I will never be one of you, though. Good for you guys,
Yeah, I don't. I don't know. But I don't want to think about it anymore. Since the bye for this team, excluding week 18 with Laporta leaving early, Amon-Ra St. Brown's got a 29.5% target share, 2.9 downfield targets per game, 17% of the red zone opportunities, and 38% of the red zone targets. He's got like that just volume based upside that you love, and in a sense, I'm more likely to play that on a 2-game slate because it's not the floor, but the odds of him just getting 3 targets for like 8 yards just doesn't exist because it's not how or I guess I should say 3 catches for like 20
I think
yards.
the key difference is you don't need a 30 burger on a 2-game slate.
That's basically what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
If I still ran like standard deviation numbers, he'd probably be one of the most consistent
Right.
wide receivers that we have, or just frankly players overall. So I really like him. I just don't know if I can quite get there because I want to play a lot of Josh Allen. And while we talked about liking all 4 quarterbacks, boy, I want to get to Josh Allen, who we'll talk about later.
I think that the biggest priority for this game, as far as pass catchers go, is Evans. I don't know if I can get there with Allen, and that's kind of the key thing. But like, if I could play an ideal world, I want Mike Evans. Like, I know you can watch last week and be like, oh my gosh, he kept dropping passes. This is miserable. Like, what is he doing? But that also means he was getting open. And you put that indoors. Mike Evans has had issues with drops at times in his past, but also if I'm betting on Mike Evans catching an open target, I'm going to bet on him to do so versus against him doing so. So it's kind of like a bet on regression for Mike Evans. Now, the counterpoint here would be, if we're looking at this offense from week 14 on, which is where David Moore's snaps run up, which is weird that I have to look at that. But in that time, Chris Godwin's target share is 27%. Mike Evans is at 21% in that time. Evans has a 44% deep target share, which is tremendous. Godwin's at 31%, though, which is not bad. Red zone targets do still favor Evans 27% to 13%. So although Evans to me is a priority because I want those efficient deep balls and I want his like grown man strength, I do think Godwin's a pretty good play too. How are you feeling about those guys, and any interest in David Moore or Trey Palmer here? Or Kate Otten, I guess. I'm not going to use Kate Otten. I don't care what happened last week, but no.
He's in like every optimizer, I think.
Good for them. You can I'll chase points with Romeo Dobbs. I'm not going to chase points with Kate Otten.
Talk about some drops though. But
he
yeah,
still went for like 89 yards.
I know.
Miserable.
I think his only incompletions were all drops. Wasn't he like 8 for 11?
Yeah. How do you lose 32-9 when the opposing team has like 6 impactful drops? Like, ugh.
Yeah. Detroit 31st in yards per route run allowed to wide receivers, 29th in ADOT. That sets up for Mike Evans. I think you make a really good point with trying to prioritize Evans. As for like Chris Godwin, I'm okay with it for sure. I've been higher on him in the past. It's just by comparison, he's like an Amon-Ra St. Brown light now, but he's not the top guy in the offense. So again, though, this comes back to how much you're stacking this game. I'm more likely to, it's not to say that I'm not playing Godwin in a one-off, or if I'm not playing Baker, but I think like a Godwin Evans Baker stack is really appealing. So I think I'm a little more game dependent with Godwin than I am much more game dependent than I am with Evans.
Okay, I agree with that. Let's talk about the Detroit side as far as the value plays go. We got Josh Reynolds at 61 and Jameson Williams at 53. Reynolds had another good game last week. I dismissed him last week because I thought, okay, the target spike in week 18, they didn't need to win that game. And it was his friend Jared Goff trying to get him incentives. But then revenge game last week, and Reynolds pops up in a big way. 7 targets, 80 yards. So I am more open to Josh Reynolds now than I was. I still like Jameson Williams because that salary is at 53. How are you feeling about these two guys in the context of the 2-game slate?
Yeah. So again, if I look at like the post buy without the sort of adjusting for Laporta, Reynolds is at 11.3% target share, 17.1% of the air yards, ADOT's over 10.5 yards, 2.1 downfield targets per game. Not a great red zone role, but you're not going to get everything at a salary like this. And over the past 2 weeks, he's had single game target shares of 23% and 27%. I don't know how you look at that in an indoor environment and just sort of cross it off. I don't think he's like a true core play because this might not be as sticky as we would like for it to be. But I also think that it's sticky enough to kind of assume that he will be in like my main lineup because of what I need to do to get to some of the higher upside plays and build around 3 mid-range, because every running back's basically mid-range on this slate.
Yeah.
To get access to 3 of them and not kind of overlook the obvious route of flexing a running back with a good role this week. So I think Reynolds probably there. I think we'll have to have the Reynolds and Shakir conversation maybe once we get to that later game. But where are you with Reynolds?
I'm more likely to use Jameson Williams than Reynolds because $800 can go along.
I know.
I don't need to tell you that, but I should tell people that because I can't assume people know my vices. But Williams last week ran 26 routes. Amon-Ra and Reynolds both ran 29. So he was right there. And only 2 targets. What?
His catch rate over expectation on 2 targets was 41%. And
he's good. Yards. He's good. What do you mean? Come on. What? Stop. Come on, get out of here. If you look at the game since their bye week, that Williams has been fully healthy. So omitting the game he missed in week 18 and omitting week 17. If you include week 17, his target share would actually go up because he had 3 targets before he left. But let's disregard that. 10% target share for Williams compared to 11.7% for Reynolds. 27% deep target share for Williams. 23% for Reynolds. So I think they're just kind of similar. And yet I'm getting $800 discount on Williams. Like for Reynolds, for me, it's a 1-game sample of improving because like I could not care less what he did in week 18 because Williams was not playing. I don't think that game is relevant as far as this. I think last week was. So like that's relevant. But like I think it's a 1-game sample of him being a guy, like a target earner. And it was against his former team's revenge game narrative. But I can save $800 and go Williams. So I'm going to go Williams over Reynolds. And I like Shakir more than Reynolds too.
So Williams has earned a target on 16.1% of his routes. Reynolds 14.5%. This is full season, just for context. 1.40 yards per route run for each of them. Reynolds much more likely to get like end zone or red zone work. Again, full season. I would have to prefer him, but the point of the $800 is enough that Williams definitely. I was going to call him Williamson.
There was a similar-ish. I can't say similar, so that's very rude to him. There was another former first-round pick who was like known for speed and like deep targets named Troy Williamson. He was the Vikings like 7th overall pick, like way back when I was a kid. I'm hoping you're not associating the two because that would be really
no.
That would make me so sad. But
it's his first name. It's his first name.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
yeah, that's where I'm coming from. And I know, like, it's not like I can't remember it. It's just like every time I say it, I just want to, like, I got to pause. But yeah, he's very much in play. Okay. And again, another reason why, like, look, I know I went back and forth on Goff. I still might, by the end of this, prefer Goff to Mahomes just because I don't necessarily anticipate a lot of downfield work for Mahomes. But Goff's got numerous pass catchers. We got to talk about Laporta as well.
Sure.
So let's move there. But yeah, I think 3 receivers are in play for Goff at least.
Yeah, I think so too. With Laporta at 66, his role is really good. I just prefer Kincaid at 62, and I think I prefer Kelsey at 71 as well. So I think he's a tight end 3 for me on this slate. Is that too low? Where are you on Laporta compared to Kelsey and Kincaid?
I don't think it's like too low. it comes back to, that's why I said this slate is more, it's not about who you prioritize so much as it is, I think, what game you're stacking and which way you're stacking it. If you're playing like Mahomes, I don't know how you play Mahomes and not Kelsey, like at that rate, unless you're saying Mahomes is going to run for 2 touchdowns and
3 touchdowns, actually. Yes.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So this one's definitely more stack dependent to me. But yeah, Laporta, very intriguing because his role is just really good. And the matchup is actually really appealing too. Tampa Bay 30th in target per route rate allowed to the position, 27th in yards per route run. I think it's appealing. It sounds like I'm higher on Laporta than you are, even if he's not 100%, but he played a lot of snaps last week. So
Laporta or Kincaid?
Laporta, I feel safer with his workload.
Okay, I'll go
overall.
Kincaid in that one personally. They're finally throwing the ball downfield to him. What a novel concept. Kudos to Joe Brady for unlocking the key to this entire offense. Let's talk about that game right now and talk about the Bills and the Chiefs right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. Bills are 2.5-point favorites. That line is held steady throughout the entire week. Total in this game is 45.5. There is some potential win in this game, 9 miles per hour, slight downgrade, but nothing too outrageous there. But keep in mind, this one is outdoors versus the other one is indoors. I have total in this game at 45. Total for Detroit, Tampa Bay, 47.8. So not a huge gap, but it does favor the indoor game, at least based on what my model says. Injuries to note for this week. Still no Gabe Davis at practice on Wednesday. The knee injury that forced him to sit out the wild card round. I think he'll probably sit out this one as well. And then the Bills linebackers are super banged up. Seems likely that both Balin Spector and Terrell Bernard missed this game. So could open up some things for the Chiefs, and who benefits from banged up linebackers, running backs, and tight ends. And, just more justification for me to use Isaiah Pacheco. What's your overall view here of Chiefs versus Bills?
Yeah, similar to you where I know what the total is, but kind of expecting fewer points than I do with Tampa Bay and Detroit. We talk a lot during the season about second time around divisional matchups, which is not what this is, but these two teams played relatively recently. How do you tend to factor that in, sort of rematches for teams in the playoffs?
I don't really factor it in much.
Okay,
Because I feel like changes.
I feel like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
And look at that one game sample. And I do that a bit.
I think every game this week is a rematch except for Packers 49ers.
Yeah, this one though stands out so much because of how it ended and because these two teams are these two teams. But it was just something that I figured we probably should have touched on earlier. But yeah, my overall fear is again, Mahomes in that game didn't throw deep a lot. Mahomes against teams that try to limit downfield passing. I guess it's not that he doesn't throw deep, it's that he throws so many bunnies and then also throws deep, which is fine. But it's a lot of low ADOT targets, which
he doesn't throw deep to the right guys.
that's also probably fair.
If you look at I've got here the sample on them being, since their bye week, omitting week 18, but factoring in the playoff game, Rashee Rice has a 14% deep target share and Travis Kelce's at 21%. So when they do go deep, they're not going to those two guys. They're going to Justin Watson, who has a 30% deep target share. And that does mean Justin Watson is in play, but it also means that, when you're stacking Mahomes, you're less likely to get a huge deep ball touchdown with the stacking partner you have with him.
Yeah. Now in that matchup, Kelce and Rice both had 10 targets, Rice 72 yards and a touchdown, Kelce 83 yards, no scores, but they did get some downfield work, at least 3 downfield targets apiece, but they ate out themselves, for Rice in particular, but that's kind of typical for Rice where he's, I don't want to throw him in the Debo bucket, but he gets downfield work, but his ADOTs are also really low, which is just kind of peculiar to see. I like both of them. I think the conversation needs to, you have Rice here, but I think the real conversation is, can Kelce still torch us? Do you expect him to do that? this week.
Can he? Yes. He had 71 yards last week on 10 targets, and 10 targets for a tight end is pretty tough to duplicate. And the gap between Kelsey's salary and the other guys I think worth considering here in Laporta and Kincaid is not that large. So I do think that Kelsey can burn us for not using him. 21% target share for Kelsey since their bye week omitting week 18, 21% deep, 20% inside the red zone. This past week, I thought his role was pretty good. He had another key drop there, which is annoying, but like, and again, he will benefit more from the banged up linebackers than Rashee Rice will. So if you give me one Mahomes lineup, I am more likely to have Kelsey in it than Rashee Rice, in large part because I think that the replaceability of Rice with Mike Evans right beneath him is higher than it is with Kelsey and the other guys.
I agree completely. And it's not that he's due, but he hasn't scored in 2, 4, 6, 7 straight games.
I think he scored plenty, but yes, it's been a bit since he scored a touchdown for Travis Kelsey. So waiting on regression on the football field at least. You're not gonna transition to anything else. You're just gonna let that sit in the ether for a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk Justin Watson then. I figured you would just move on. I didn't think you would. Okay, anyway. Justin Watson's salary is $5,000. I kind of thought that Mecole Hardman would get a roll-up tick this past week, and he did. He was on the field a bunch, but like it didn't go well, and it seemed like he was not on the same page with Mahomes. 26 routes run for Watson versus 18 for Hardman, 18 for Marquez Valdez-Scantling as well. And as mentioned, Watson has a 30% deep target share. So I think it's kind of one of those plunk your nose and like put him in kind of things. I prefer Jamison Williams over Justin Watson, but I am receptive to Watson at times. How are you feeling about him in this spot?
I don't have nearly as much interest, I think, as you do based on what you just said.
You don't want to use a guy with a 10% target share? Since they're bye?
No,
weird.
No, and like it's not just that, it's sort of the expectations. I would play Watson more if I expected downfield passing to be there, but it is a big fear of mine with what teams force Mahomes to do. And we already kind of saw it in a sense. Again, it's not that Mahomes will not throw downfield. It's that he has a very low ADOT. So he's going to have some shots, but if he doesn't connect on those, it could be a lot of just horizontal passing, and that might not be enough to separate, especially when you're looking at the other side of the ball in this game with Josh Allen. Yeah. So I know going from Watson to Josh Allen is kind of a transition there, but
it's the same thing.
I don't do you expect enough passing from Mahomes to make Watson relevant? It sounds like you do.
Yeah.
But I kind of am just a little bit worried about.
You mean enough passing or enough deep passing?
Both.
Okay.
More the deep passing.
Like I'm not actively seeking out Watson, but I'm being realistic that if I want to get Josh Allen to 94, I got to save salary. So
you don't need to play Justin Watson to do that.
With Josh Allen?
Yeah.
That's probably fair. Is Allen your quarterback one across the 4-game slate? I think the 2-game slate, it kind of goes without saying.
Yeah, I would have to put him there.
Yeah.
He's just, I mean, it's incredible what he does. Like the ability to run, not just consistently, but to break long runs. And then also, honestly, just fake out defenders and like their pick up first downs over expectation. Like only he can at this point.
There are no other teams in football where you're excited when they have 3rd and 8, because 3rd and 8 means Josh Allen's probably going to run. He's probably going to do some crazy stuff.
And like, he's going to get hit and like stopped and then break a tackle from someone like a linebacker who's actually smaller than he is.
Yeah. Like he's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. My numbers definitely like Allen on the 4-game slate primarily. You're going to have more value opportunities. Lamar's close, but for me, it's going to be Allen, because while Lamar seems content handing the ball off to any of 16 running backs, Josh Allen gets those touchdowns lately. So
Yeah.
I'm leading Allen, and that makes him a true priority on the 2-game slate.
And I
Where
think it's gone overlooked, the tush push factor with them. Like he's pretty
yeah,
bad at it. Like I think it's someone with like a massive like attention deficit issues. I think he needs like something to like help him focus because like he's looking at like the sticks when he's trying to like do a tush push. It's like just go forward, man, and the rest will figure it out. So like just pay attention to the ball, Josh. Put your head down, tush push. He like somehow like somersaults through the air on a tush push. It's very weird. He's bad at it, but they do it. So like that's great. So I think that part needs to be factored in too with Allen, is that they will get tush pushes and some easy short yardage touchdowns as well. Let's talk about his pass catchers. Stephon Diggs, 75. I assume there's no Gabe Davis again this week, which means Khalil Shakir, very interesting, 59. And then also Dalton Kincaid checks in at $6,200. Looking back to last week, Diggs ran 30 routes. Shakir ran 28 though. So Shakir, $5,900. Where does he settle in for you? How you feeling about Diggs and Kincaid as well?
Sorry, you said Diggs ran 30 routes and Shakir ran 28.
Yes.
Did Diggs miss snaps, or was he just banged up and
He
then
always
came
misses
right back?
snaps.
Yeah,
he did get
does.
banged up at one point. But
No,
like,
I know. I just couldn't quite remember that. But yeah,
he always misses
Shakir,
snaps. He's a weird dude. I don't know.
just the 3 targets, but an 88% route rate. That just stands out relative to really any wide receivers, because even though we've seen a decrease in full workloads for running backs, we've also you don't get like 100% route rates very often, or like 95% route rates very often for receivers. So 88%, very intriguing, even though it was only 3 targets. He had the touchdown, but he's like a good player. Buffalo seems to get the ball into the hands of like their better players whenever they have players who can kind of do stuff. So I feel kind of decent with Shakir at 59. Helps offset a lot of the salary for Josh Allen.
Mm-hmm.
And it also just kind of protects you because like Allen might run for 2 touchdowns and throw for 2. And even if Shakir has 40 yards and doesn't score, you don't really want that. But the salary to get up to Allen, I think, kind of makes it worth it in the correlation play. So I like Shakir, but where are you with Diggs? Someone we haven't really played all year.
Yeah. I played him a lot in the Miami game, which didn't go great. It was fine. But it seems like they're actively trying to get in the ball more recently, which is good. I think they've realized how big the downturn has been for him from a workload perspective. 9 targets in that game against Kansas City, or against Pittsburgh, and his 8 out was 6.9. Part of that could have been the wind, because the wind was pretty high there, but like they were willing to throw downfield to Kincaid and Knox and stuff like that. So I think that to me says they were scheming up targets for him, which is good. But like, would you rather go Diggs outdoors at 75 or Mike Evans indoors at 76?
Evans.
Yeah.
And this is with the caveat that I'm going to play a lot of Josh Allen.
Right.
Evans pretty often.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Let's talk about the running backs in this game. Isaiah Pacheco's salary, $7,500. I think that McKinnon had surgery, so I'm pretty sure he's not back this week. He at least was not activated for practice on Wednesday, so I think we'll get another week with no McKinnon here for the Chiefs. James Cook checks in at $6,800. I like both personally quite a bit. Prefer Pacheco. Pacheco, my RB1 for this slate. Potentially my RB1 for the entire weekend. And James Cook is right up there too. So I like both these guys a lot. Where do you sit on these two?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to look into the McKinnon stuff. I don't think he's coming back. I think he did have the surgery, but these two, Pacheco, it's weird. I probably prefer like Pacheco as the route to the Chiefs compared to Mahomes, because the alternative.
So you use Josh Allen as quarterback, Pacheco as the bring back kind of thing.
Like I'm more likely to do that than I think play Mahomes.
Sure.
More often than not, I'm gonna play some Mahomes lineups for sure. Like it's not.
Yeah.
But Pacheco, his role really strong. He's really good. He runs like he's never gonna stop. I'm a little lower on Cook by comparison. I know, like you said, Pacheco's your favorite running back of the whole weekend. I don't know how much Cook I want to play. If I'm just being honest, I don't. I just worry about like the touchdown equity.
Sure.
And I don't love this game overall, but Pacheco by comparison, easily the standout. But I'm not against playing Cook with Allen, even though they can sort of cannibalize each other.
But they can also double dip because Cook in the games with Joe Brady as offense coordinator is at 3.7 targets per game, 15.9 carries per game. So I know the production has not been there recently, but it can be. And the Chiefs are gettable on the ground. Their defense, based on numberFire schedule adjusted metrics, 27th against the rush. So I could see Cook being a really efficient piece in this game. 18 carries, 4 targets last week in that first round game. They do filter in like Latavius Murray and Ty Johnson. Ty Johnson's red zone sharing games with Joe Brady is actually 17%. So like, Cook's at 26%. So it's not the worst, but it's also not great. So
yeah,
I like him more than you do, and I'm okay with that. But I think that these are the top 2 guys for me on the 2-game slate. Pacheco 1, Cook 2.
Yeah, on the 2-game slate, I think by default, it's going to be Cook is my second back. I would go White over Cook if there's no Edmonds.
Okay.
But his path to production is at least less blocked up than what we have for Gibbs and Montgomery. I just think it's like Pacheco, and then I could sort of be talked into playing any 2 of the 4 of Gibbs, Montgomery, Cook, and White in that lineup. Just not really Gibbs and Montgomery together.
Are you leaning towards an RB in the flex on the Sunday slate?
Yeah, I think that there's enough good workloads here where that's a lot easier to justify. On the 2-game slate, as in building out lineups, I kind of find if I'm playing McCaffrey, I'm flexing receivers.
Yeah, that's fair. I can understand that. I made one with McCaffrey plus Singletary plus Jones, but it involves some gross stuff that people might not be it might not be into. So I get it. Any final thoughts for you on this game or across any of the 4 games for this weekend?
One more look. Defenses on Sunday. Got
Lions.
The Lions at 44. Do you think you have the salary to get there?
Yeah, but I'm willing to go any of the 4, honestly. Like if I need to drop down to Bucks, fine. It is what it is.
Okay. I think I'm with you. But yeah, we never talk enough about. So there's really one defense we're not in on, and it's the Packers across the
Texans. No, sorry. Yeah, Packers. You're right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like it is what it is.
Okay.
So just kind of let your roster dictate where you go there. I am willing to jump down if it allows me to get to all the fun guys, because there are a lot of fun guys across this weekend. That is all that we have here for this week here on the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast. But we are back with you once again next week on Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube page, breaking down the conference championship 2-game slates. So make sure to subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page. Leave us a thumbs up if you like what you heard on this version of it as well. And also find these shows on FanDuel TV Plus and the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm on Twitter at Gdula13, GDULA13.
And I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis. You can find me on Threads at Jim.Sonis, and you can follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. I want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups across all the slates for this weekend. Enjoy the football. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.